First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Guido Elia. I work at Dante Alighieri School, and I teach cultural courses, especially for study abroad students. But actually, it happens also with international students who want to just study Italian, to use the city, to show it in order to use it as a mean for teaching the history of Italy, and of course of Siena in particular. I would like to talk today about the struggle of Siena with water, and we are very soon going to see why. Because of course, water, as we are going to see, although it's obvious, it's a fundamental for civilization. And Siena had many problems with reaching this source. I started with this quote from the Purgatory by Dante Alighieri, because it quotes Siena, and especially the research of this mythological and inexistent river that was called Diana, that the ancient Sienese believed that flowed beneath the city. And actually, Dante is right in saying that the Sienese spent their hopes and especially their money in this unfruitful research. However, the efforts, especially financial efforts of the city of Siena for finding water, actually in the end paid off. And the history of the ancient aqueduct of Siena is extremely fascinating. And it's a mean also to see how the ancient Sienese overcame this problem, also in consideration of the fact that Siena was an extremely big city in the Middle Ages. We said that Dante was actually right, and because he knew certainly about the fact that the friars of this Convento del Carmine, which is in the part of the old town in the highest part of the city, they found in 1176 a well, very deep well, and the city itself decided to invest in this research a little more than a century afterwards, but they actually didn't find any particular source of water. As a matter of fact, this river, which was legendary, doesn't exist and was never found. But it is obvious, if we look at the city, it is obvious why the ancient Sienese had a sort of obsession with water. Siena is, as a matter of fact, a hilltop city. And besides this, there are no major streams of water in the surroundings, just minor ones. As we can see, this is the old town, and it's pretty high. So we can already from here imagine the difficulties for reaching water at the time. And let's go over again, although it's obvious how the reasons why practically the ancient Sienese were in so desperate need of water, because it served for so many purposes. It's, however, necessary to remind that besides the human use, people needed water for their animals, for agriculture, even for meals, and not to be forgotten, industries, which played a very relevant the industries of the time, of course, which played a very relevant role in the economy of the city-states of the Italian Middle Ages. And last but not least, for extinguishing fires, which we can understand were very frequent in cities where along to bricks and, however, the normal materials used for building, there was also a very important use of wood, for example. So not only let's consider also the fact that some of these industries, for example, blacksmiths, involved the use of fire. And so having a source of water was extremely important for a city that, it needs to be reminded, at the highest point of its history reached the 50,000 inhabitants. And this is the reason why, in order to, throughout the centuries, and we're going to see that it's a very long span of time, this is, besides the enterprise of the Diana and of the search for that river, they started using ancient techniques that, as we will see, were already known by the Etruscans and the Romans, and they enhanced them and dug these tunnels, extremely long tunnels, trying to reach the actually not very abundant streams of water in the outskirts of the city center. And it's a very complex net. As we can see, it's 25 kilometers long. There are two main branches. This is the Bottino Maestro di Fontegaia. It's the longest, the most recent. It was built during the time of the Nove, when the Siena was under the government of the Nove, as it is called. So it means the last part of the 13th century, first half of the 14th century. And it's the aqueduct that brings water to the fountain in Piazza del Campo, which is, by the way, also the highest height, the highest level at which water was ever brought during the Middle Ages in Siena. The other branch, Bottino Maestro di Fontebranda, instead, it is older, and it flows at deeper depths. And of course, it gets its name from the Fontebranda, which is one of the oldest fountains of Siena. There are also other minor branches of the aqueduct that are not linked to such as, for example, oh, I'm afraid you're not seeing my pointer. I beg your pardon. Now it should be more obvious. For example, these aqueduct or these other little branches that we can see, they're independent ones, but the two main the two main sources of water were, of course, the Fontebranda and the Fontegaia aqueduct. I took this picture from Google Maps in order to let you picture how far these streams are. If we see the previous, this point here, okay, is roughly this point here, and Piazza del Campo is more or less here. So let's consider the length of this engineering work, especially. But how was this possible? This was possible also for geological reasons, because the Siena lays on a layer of sandstone, which is permeable, and besides on a layer of clay, which is instead impermeable and therefore can collect the water that drains. The techniques that were used were different from Fontebranda and Fontegaia. In the case of Fontebranda, they started digging from the source towards the fount in one direction, and this was possible because, as you see, they always were very close to the clay the clay layer that is the impermeable one. Whereas Fontegaia was excavated from the two ends. And this also actually resulted in some cases in some points where the vault is higher than the usual, or the tunnel itself is wider, because they didn't, the two teams working didn't reach exactly the same point. And the tools that were used to perform this huge work were very rudimental. Of course, only one person at the time could work inside, and so it took centuries to reach the current length. And also this tool here, the plumb rule, which was used in order to give a specific pendency to this channel of water, which was 1 each 1,000, which means that every 1 meter, for example, in depth, it went 1,000 meters in length. So thanks to this very slight pendency, the water flowed very slowly, allowing the debris, the material, and the calcium present in the water to at least partially sediment. The first appearance of the word bottino is in 1226, and this word, which gives the name to the whole system of the aqueduct, the bottini, it has its name from the vault, which is barrel shaped. So botte in Italiano is barrel, so bottino was the name that was used. I have prepared, just 1 second, so to give you a better idea about how this aqueduct is, I've prepared a brief video. Okay, here we are. Okay, and where we can see the entrance, for example, and also the end of this bottini. First of all, we see the Bottino Maestro di Fonte Gaia, and here is the entrance, right in Piazza del Campo. It's hidden next to this Ristorante Il Mangia, and we see this this worker of the Comune, of the city of Siena, that goes down below the ground to reach the aqueduct. Oh, I was forgetting to mention that not only through the pendency the water was able to sediment, but also in some cases, in some parts of the city, especially in the immediate outskirts north of Porta Camollia, were built some basins that slowed even further water, allowing it to sediment, because it was extremely rich in calcium. It is said that the ancient Sienese suffered from these calculus. I actually don't know the English term, however, the kidney stones. Now it comes to my mind, due to the quality of their water. And so, as you see, the water flows in on the bottom of this little tunnel, and there are, of course, also other branches. We have to say that the initial use of this aqueduct was almost exclusively private, but over the time, almost exclusively public, sorry, but over the time also privates were allowed to take water from the aqueduct and pay for the water to put in their cisterns and wells. Just to show you, and here, as we see, it is not very visible, but there are some names written. These are actually quite recent. They date back to the 18th or also 19th century. They are the names of the people who used these, who were allowed to use this water, and so that could collect in their private homes these precious public good. For example, this was a private cistern. And it was calculated, the amount of water, through a very clever system. So sort of holes, as we can see right here. Okay, these holes, each hole was called dado, dice, and each hole corresponded to daily 400 liters of water. So as we see, then the water, after coming from the outskirts, reaches the main square, and we have already mentioned the fact that it's the highest quota, the highest level to which water was ever brought. And it's called Fonte Gaia, Fountain of Joy, because of the importance of having right in the main square these precious good that was lacking in the city. But the oldest of the not only, I was forgetting to say, I'm sorry, I was forgetting to say that the water of Fonte Gaia, in turn, the exceeding water went in other minor fountains that were at lower levels. For example, this was called Fonte Serena. But they were not very comfortable, as we can see, because you needed to go so much down. And that's the need. That's the need for having Fonte Gaia, for having a fountain that was at a different height and more easily reachable. Whereas this is probably the oldest of the founts in Siena. It's called the Fontanella. And we believe that it's the oldest, not only because of the incrustations of calcium, the stalagmites and stalactites that show its very old age, but also because of a in particular. We have mentioned the fact that the vault in the bottini is barrel-like, is shaped like a barrel, and so the term bottini. But in this one, in this bottino, the vault, if you notice, is shaped like a hat, which instead would be characteristic of the Etruscan architecture. And this would lead to the theory that it's the oldest, also in light of its position, that it's right beneath the oldest castrum, the oldest part of the city. You see the hat-like vault in this bottino, and hence this theory. But it first appeared in documents in the 13th century. And now let's see where is the stream of water. Where is the source? As we can see, we are in the countryside, in the outskirts of Siena, in open countryside, and here is a oculum, so one of the openings that were performed around along the track of the bottini, both to bring out materials, but also the construction materials, but also to check if they were digging in the right direction, for example, but of course also for maintenance. And we start seeing already from these stairs that were excavated for slowing it down. Here is the water that starts to flow and is therefore channeled and collected in the bottino and brought to, in this case, to Piazza del Campo, to the private wells, and to the fountains that lie beneath, at a lower level of Fonte Gaia. So here was the video clip. Just 1 minute, I'm sorry. Okay, here we are again. Beg your pardon, I have to click here. And so those are the bottini. That is how the bottini look like. This, for example, is the bottino Fontanella. Again, we can see this steep flight of stairs and how uncomfortable it must have been, the first of these fountains. And It was first mentioned, as we see, in 1263, but it is commonly accepted to believe that it actually dates back to Etruscan times. Again, this technique was performed in larger scale by the Sienese of the Middle Ages, but was already known by Etruscans and Romans. This is Fonte Gaia, the monumental fountain that was made by Jacopo della Quercia, but it actually was inaugurated on January the 5th of 1343. And as we can see, the fountains were a particularly important element in the urban architecture of the city. They are very elegant. This, for example, is Fontebranda. It is said by the ancient Sienese that the travelers of the time who passed by Siena always wanted to see Fontebranda, just like now people want to go to see Piazza del Campo, for example. And they were particularly they were particularly interesting, not only because of their function, but also how they were made to let not a single drop of water to be wasted. And although now they have been restored, but we know, oh, sorry, one too much, but we know that most fountains were arranged in such a way. So with the sort of water stations for the various purposes, as we have said previously. So human purposes, then for animal purposes, and for washing as well. But not only. After this, the water was not, of course, wasted, but it went in the surrounding valleys and of course, for the crops, for the countryside, but not only, also for example, meals. For instance, so much was abundant, and not by chance. The tanneries and butcheries historically at the time were in Fontebranda, which was the fountain with the highest amount, the biggest amount of water, but at the same time for the citizens, certainly not one of the most comfortable, because it was in a lower part of the city. And it is possible to see this kind of system in this other fountain. It's called Fonte di Pescaia. Here we see there are still the arches where people went to collect water. In these other sorry, again, I clicked. In this other part here, where some sort of small fountains for letting the animals drink, and on this side, on our left, was this basin for washing clothes. And we have to say that this was still used until quite recent times, until the 50s. This aqueduct itself was still used by the Sienese until the the early 20th century. As a matter of fact, the water that we drink nowadays comes from further distance. It comes from this mountain, Monte Amiata, that is in the province of Siena, and through a channel that is 64 kilometers long. It's very light and delicious water, and also especially abundant, gets finally in 1914 inside the city center. So the Bottini aqueduct, it was built theoretically, we can say, if we consider also the Etruscan parts, from in the ancient times until the 15th century. In the 15th century were performed the last works on the aqueduct, and which has ever since remained the same, if not for some maintenance works. And currently it only serves for the city fountains. As we see, it's still active. It still brings water to those fountains and those private wells. Uh, and there are also some very few actually private uses for example, irrigation of the public green, but not much more. However, nevertheless, it's the memory of a struggle of the of our ancestors with this element of nature, and a struggle that was actually, at least to some extent, successful, because it's a actually Siena could prosper for quite some time. But we have to admit that we can see in the documents that the problem of water, it's a scarcity, and in periods of scarcity, even the quality of water was actually forever a one of the major concerns of the citizens. I also wanted to show you this fun, in my opinion, quote by Dickens, who once, during his grand tour through Italy, passed by Siena, who in his letters wrote that Siena is like a bit of Venice, but without water. So I guess that even travelers perceived the lack of this element from the urban landscape of Siena, an element that is instead present in the obviously in all the major European cities which have a river. And another curiosity, speaking of Siena and its relationship with water, is this postcard which I found that I don't know actually, honestly, for which reason, but apparently there was a whole set of this kind of modified pictures with the leitmotif, if Siena had the sea, as if to mean that its urban landscape could fit very well with this kind of element, if it was ever possible. So thank you very much for attending. Please continue to follow us on Facebook and through our conferences. I hope to see all of you soon in the next one that I will hold. Please consider all of us at your disposal for any further information you may need. And here it's 7:36 p.m. and I take the chance to wish you a good day and buon appetito in my case. Good evening. Ciao.